So why you think the protest is important?
Hello, my name's Mark Hodson. I edit Manchester Climate Monthly. The climate protests are really important because for a long time people have known about climate change but not thought that it was urgent. And just in the last few weeks with Greta Thunberg, with Extinction Rebellion and with the David Attenborough documentary, people have gone from knowing in the back of their minds that climate change is an issue that they have to deal with, to thinking this is an emergency, this is a problem we have to do a lot about right now. And that wouldn't happen without protest, without ordinary people coming out onto the streets and saying, we care.
And what's the urgent action that the government should do?
So the urgent actions that the government should do, from Extinction Rebellion's point of view, is to make a zero carbon by 2025 plan, to tell the truth and to convene citizens' assemblies. I myself am not fully convinced that those are the right actions, but we do definitely need to stop supporting fossil fuel investment and exploration. We need to forbid it so that, for example, fracking is just no longer a thing. Fracking is insane, regardless of the water pollution issues, the earthquakes, the rest of it. Purely on a climate position, fracking's just not acceptable. I would turn the question around. It's not about just what we expect the government and the bureaucrats to do. It's about what we expect ourselves to do and how we expect citizens groups, environment groups to make it easier for people to get involved in taking action in their homes, in their communities, in their workplaces, and make it easy for people to behave like citizens who get together and educate themselves and each other and make real radical demands, not just on government, but on corporations as well.
And do you think Manchester, two actions, environmental actions of Manchester is enough?
So you've asked me about the two sort of headline goals that Manchester has around plastics, sort of single-use plastics abolished by 2020 and the climate goal. So on the plastics thing, I think what's happening is we're picking a problem that we think we can solve quickly to make ourselves feel good, and we're ignoring the much bigger, more serious problem around climate change. And the context to understand with Greater Manchester and Manchester City Council is that this is not the first time they've come under pressure to take action on climate change. Between about 2006 and 2010, the City Council and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, or AGMA as it then was, came under intense pressure from activists like me, and they came up with what looked like radical policies and radical plans. And over the last 10 years, they have totally failed to implement those plans, and the emissions reductions that we've seen have largely come from national factors like the decarbonisation of the grid. And the creation of a low carbon culture that was the second part of Manchester City's plan simply has not happened. So I would argue that if we trust governments on these new plans, we're a bit foolish because we already have evidence that they didn't implement the last plans. To finally answer your question, 2038 is a very long time away, and it will be easy for politicians to say, oh, well, we haven't made good progress this year, but next year or the year after, because it's basically 20 years, which is the length of a politician's career. A 2030 goal would be closer to what the Paris Agreement demands, and it would make it more difficult for politicians to ignore the problem and just what we call kick the can down the road. And I think we need to understand that missing a 2030 target by a year or two would be bad, but hitting a 2038 target would be worse, because we do not have time. This is an emergency, and because you've agreed to give me the footage, I'm going to put the footage up. And my last thing I want people to understand is This is not a dress rehearsal. You cannot leave this to anyone else. You have to get involved. It's a moral imperative on you to act as a citizen. There are groups out there that will help you. You are not alone. There's Fridays for the Future, there's Extinction Rebellion, there's Climate Emergency Manchester that I'm involved in, and if none of those groups is what you want, there are other groups as well. But for goodness sake, for your own sake, for the sake of your children, get involved.
Thank you, Mark.